Welcome back, everyone. Sorry this episode is a week late. I was getting ready to go on vacation to a event called Penzic. If you're interested in that, if you're interested in medieval stuff, Ren fairs, things like that, it's a medieval reenactment type deal. It happens once a year in Pennsylvania. Look that up. Look up the SCA as well. It's a wonderful group of people to get to know and have fun with, and just dress up and get out there and party. So yeah, go look up Penzic. But sorry this episode's late. I'm gonna be doing 2 episodes for this current week, so that I can catch up and so that it doesn't throw everything off that I have planned for the year. So today we are going to read chapters 13 through 16, and let's get into it. Chapter 13. Marvin trudged on down the corridor, still moaning. And then, of course, I've got this terrible pain in all the diodes down my left-hand side. No? Said Arthur grimly as he walked along beside him. Really? Oh, yes, said Marvin. I mean, I've asked for them to be replaced, but no one ever listens. I can imagine. Vague whistling and humming noises were coming from Ford. Well, 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 he kept saying to himself. Zaphod Beeblebrox. Suddenly, Marvin stopped and held up a hand. You know what's happened now, of course. No, what? Said Arthur, who didn't want to know. We've arrived at another of those doors. There was a sliding door let into the side of the corridor. Marvin eyed it suspiciously. Well, said Ford impatiently, do we go through? Do we go through? Mimicked Marvin. Yes. This is the entrance to the bridge. I was told to take you to the bridge. Probably the highest demand that will be made on my intellectual capacities today. I shouldn't wonder. Slowly, with great loathing, he stepped toward the door like a hunter stalking his prey. Suddenly it slid open. Thank you, it said, for making a simple door very happy. Deep in Marvin's thorax gears ground. Funny, he intoned funerally. How just when you think life can't possibly get any worse, it suddenly does. He heaved himself through the door and left Ford and Arthur staring at each other and shrugging their shoulders. From inside, they heard Marvin's voice again. I suppose you'll want to see the aliens now, he said. Do you want me to sit in a corner and rust, or just fall apart where I'm standing? Yeah, just show them in, would you, Marvin? Came another voice. Arthur looked at Ford and was astonished to see him laughing. What's... Shh, said Ford. Come on in. He stepped through into the bridge. Arthur followed him in nervously and was astonished to see a man lolling back in a chair with his feet on a control console, picking the teeth in his right-hand head with his left hand. The right-hand head seemed to be thoroughly preoccupied with this task, but the left-hand one was grinning a broad, relaxed, nonchalant grin. The number of things that Arthur couldn't believe he was seeing was fairly large. His jaw flopped about at a loose end for a while. The peculiar man waved a lazy wave at Ford, and with an appalling affectation of nonchalance said, Hi, Ford. Hi. How are you? Glad you could drop in. Ford was not going to be outcooled. Zaphod, he drawled. Great to see you. You're looking well. The extra arm suits you. Nice ship you've stolen. Arthur goggled at him. You mean you know this guy? He said, waving a wild finger at Zaphod. Know him? Exclaimed Ford. He paused and decided to do the introductions the other way around. Oh, Zaphod, this is a friend of mine, Arthur Dent, he said. I saved him when his planet blew up." "Oh, sure," said Zaphod. "Hi, Arthur. Glad you can make it." His right-hand head looked round casually and said, "Hi," and went back to having its teeth picked. Ford carried on. "And Arthur," he said, "this is my semi-cousin, Zaphod Beeb." "We've met," said Arthur sharply. "When you're cruising down the road in the fast lane and you lazily sail past a few hard-driving cars and are feeling pretty pleased with yourself and then accidentally change down from fourth to first instead of third, thus making your engine leap out of your hood in a rather ugly mess, it tends to throw you off your stride in much the same way that this remark threw Ford Prefect off his. What?" he said. "I said we've met." Zaphod gave an awkward start of surprise and jabbed a gum sharply. "Hey, have we?" Ford rounded on Arthur with an angry flash in his eyes. Now he felt he was back on home ground. He suddenly began to resent having lumbered himself with this ignorant primitive who knew as much about the affairs of the galaxy as an Ilford-based gnat knew about life in Peking. "What do you mean you've met?" he demanded. "This is Zaphod Beeblebrox from Beetlejuice 5. You know, not bloody Martin Smith from Crichton." "I don't care," said Arthur coldly. "We've met, haven't we, Zaphod Beeblebrox? Or should I say, Phil?" "What?" shouted Ford. "You'll have to remind me," said Zaphod. "I have a terrible memory for species." "It was at a party," pursued Arthur. "Yeah, well, I doubt that," said Zaphod. "Cool it, will you, Arthur?" demanded Ford. Arthur would not be deterred. "A party 6 months ago, on Earth, England." Zaphod shook his head with a tight-lipped smile. "London," insisted Arthur. "Islington." "Oh," said Zaphod with a guilty start. "That party." This wasn't fair on Ford at all. He looked backward and forward between Arthur and Zaphod. "What?" he said to Zaphod. "You don't mean to say you've been on that miserable little planet as well, do you?" "No, of course not," said Zaphod breezily. "Well, I may have just dropped in briefly, on my way somewhere. But I was stuck there for 15 years. Well, I didn't know that, did I?" "But what were you doing there?" "Looking about, He gate-crashed a party," said Arthur, trembling with anger. "A fancy dress party." It would have to be, wouldn't it?" said Ford. "At this party," persisted Arthur, "was a girl." "Oh, well, look, it doesn't matter now. The whole place has gone up in smoke anyway." "I wish you'd stop sulking about that bloody planet," said Ford. "Who was the lady?" "Oh, just somebody. Well, all right. I wasn't doing very well with her. I'd been trying all evening. Hell, she was something, though. Beautiful, charming, devastatingly intelligent. At last, I'd got her to myself for a bit and was plying her with a bit of talk when this friend of yours barges up and says, 'Hey, doll, is this guy boring you? Why don't you talk to me instead? I'm from a different planet.' I never saw her again." "Zaphod!" exclaimed Ford. "Yes," said Arthur, glaring at him and trying not to feel foolish. "He only had the 2 arms and the 1 head, and he called himself Phil, but you must admit he did turn out to be from another planet," said Trillian, wandering into sight at the other end of the bridge. She gave Arthur a pleasant smile which settled on him like a ton of bricks, and then turned her attention to the ship's controls again. There was silence for a few seconds, and then out of the scrambled mess of Arthur's brain crawled some words. "Tricia McMillan?" he said. "What are you doing here?" "Same as you," she said. "I hitched a lift. After all, with a degree in math and another in astrophysics, what else was there to do? It was either that or the dull queue again on Monday." "Infinity -1, chattered the computer. "Improbability sum, now complete." Zaphod looked about him at Ford, at Arthur, and then at Trillian. "Trillian," he said, "is this sort of thing going to happen every time we use the improbability drive?" "Very probably, I'm afraid," she said. Chapter 14. The Heart of Gold fled on silently through the night of space, now on conventional photon drive. Its crew of 4 were ill at ease, knowing that they had been brought together not of their own volition or by simple coincidence, but by some curious perversion of physics, as if relationships between people were susceptible to the same laws that govern the relationships between atoms and molecules. As the ship's artificial night closed in, they were each grateful to retire to separate cabins and try to rationalize their thoughts. Trillian couldn't sleep. She sat on a couch and stared at a small cage which contained her last and only links with Earth, 2 white mice that she had insisted Zaphod let her bring. She had expected never to see the planet again, but she was disturbed by her negative reaction to the news of the planet's destruction. It seemed remote and unreal, and she could find no thoughts to think about it. She watched the mice scurrying round the cage and running furiously in their little plastic tread wheels till they occupied her whole attention. Suddenly she shook herself and went back onto the bridge to watch over the tiny flashing lights and figures that charted the ship's progress through the void. She wished she knew what it was she was trying not to think about. Zaphod couldn't sleep. He also wished he knew what it was that he wouldn't let himself think about. For as long as he could remember, he'd suffered from a vague nagging feeling of being not all there. Most of the time, he was able to put his thought aside and not worry about it, but it had been reawakened by the sudden, inexplicable arrival of Ford Prefect and Arthur Dent. Somehow, it seemed to confirm to a pattern that he couldn't see. Ford couldn't sleep. He was too excited about being back on the road again. 15 years of virtual imprisonment were over, just as he was finally beginning to give up hope. Knocking about with Zaphod for a bit promised to be a lot of fun, though there seemed to be something faintly odd about his semi-cousin that he couldn't put his finger on. The fact that he had become president of the galaxy was frankly astonishing, as was the manner of his leaving the post. Was there a reason behind it? There would be no point in asking Zaphod. He never appeared to have a reason for anything he did at all. He had turned unfathomably into an art form. Unfathomability into an art form. He attacked everything in life with a mixture of extraordinary genius and naive incompetence, and it was often difficult to tell which was which. Arthur slept. He was terribly tired. There was a tap at Zaphod's door. It slid open. "Zaphod?" "Yeah?" Trillian stood, outlined in an oval of light. "I think we just found what you came to look for." "Hey, yeah?" Ford gave up the attempt to sleep. In the corner of his cabin was a small computer screen and keyboard. He sat at it for a while and tried to compose a new entry for the guide on the subject of Vogons, but couldn't think of anything vitriolic enough, so he gave that up too, wrapped a robe round himself, and went for a walk to the bridge. As he entered, he was surprised to see 2 figures hunched excitedly over the instruments. "See, the ship's about to move into orbit," Trillian was saying. "There's a planet out there. It's at the exact coordinates you predicted." Zaphod heard a noise and looked up. "Ford!" he hissed. "Hey, come and take a look at this." Ford went and had a look at it. It was a series of figures flickering over a screen. "You recognize those galactic coordinates?" said Zaphod. "No. I'll give you a clue. Computer." "Hi, gang," enthused the computer. "This is getting real sociable, isn't it?" "Shut up," said Zaphod, "and show up the screens." Light on the bridge sank. Pinpoints of light played across the consoles and reflected in 4 pairs of eyes that stared up at the external monitor screens. There was absolutely nothing on them. Recognize that? Whispered Zaphod. Ford frowned. No, he said. What do you see? Nothing. Recognize it? What are you talking about? We're in the Horsehead Nebula. One whole vast dark cloud. And I was meant to recognize that from a blank screen? Inside a dark nebula is the only place in the galaxy you'd see a dark screen. Very good. Zaphod laughed. He was clearly very excited about something, almost childishly so. Hey, this is really terrific. This is just far too much. What's so great about being stuck in a dust cloud? Said Ford. What would you reckon to find here? Urged Zaphod. Nothing. No stars? No planets? No. Computer, shouted Zaphod. Rotate angle of vision through 180 degrees and don't talk about it. For a moment it seemed that nothing was happening, then a brightness glowed at the edge of the huge screen. A red star the size of a small plate crept across it, followed quickly by another one, a binary system. Then a vast crescent sliced into the corner of the picture, a red glare shading away into deep black, the night side of the planet. I've found it, cried Zaphod, thumping the console. I've found it! Ford stared at it in astonishment. What is it? He said. That, said Zaphod, is the most improbable planet that ever existed. Chapter 15. I'm hoping that this is actually working, because I just noticed that Yep, okay. We're just going to go on faith on this one. My recording timer stopped, so I'm hoping that it's fine. Chapter 15. Excerpt from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, page 634784, section 5A. Entry: Magrathea. Far back in the mists of ancient time, in the great and glorious days of the former galactic empire, life was wild, rich, and largely tax-free. Mighty starships plied their way between exotic suns, seeking adventure and reward among the furthest reaches of galactic space. In those days, spirits were brave. The stakes were high, men were real men, women were real women, and small furry creatures from Alpha Centauri were real small furry creatures from Alpha Centauri. And all dared to brave unknown terrors, to do mighty deeds, to boldly split infinitives that no man had split before, and thus was the empire forged. Many men, of course, became extremely rich, but this was perfectly natural and nothing to be ashamed of, because no one was really poor, at least no one worth speaking of, and for all the richest and most successful merchants' life inevitably became rather dull and niggly, and they began to imagine that this was therefore the fault of the worlds they'd settled on. None of them was entirely satisfactory. Either the climate wasn't quite right in the later part of the afternoon, or the day was half an hour too long, or the sea was exactly the wrong shade of pink. And thus were created and conditions for a staggering new form of specialist industry, custom-made luxury planet building. The home of this industry was the planet Magrathea, where hyperspatial engineers sucked matter through white holes in space to form it into dream planets, gold planets, platinum planets, soft rubber planets with lots of earthquakes, all lovingly made to meet the exacting standards that the galaxy's richest men naturally came to expect. But so successful was this venture that Magrathea itself soon became the richest planet of all time, and the rest of the galaxy was reduced to abject poverty. And so the system broke down, the empire collapsed, and a long, sullen silence settled over 1 billion hungry worlds, disturbed only by the pen scratchings of scholars as they labored into the night over smug little treaties on the value of a planned political economy. Magrathea itself disappeared, and its memory soon passed into the obscurity of legend. In these enlightened days, of course, no one believes a word of it. Chapter 16. Arthur awoke to the sound of argument and went to the bridge. Ford was waving his arms about. "You're crazy, Zaphod," he was saying. "Magrathea is a myth, a fairy story. It's what parents tell their kids about at night if they want them to grow up to become economists. And that's what we are currently in orbit about," insisted Zaphod. "Look, I can't help what you may personally be in orbit around," said Ford, "but this ship—" "Computer," shouted Zaphod. "Oh no." "Hi there! This is Eddie, your shipboard computer, and I'm feeling just great, guys, and I know I'm just going to get a bundle of kicks out of my program you care to run through me." Arthur looked inquiringly at Trillian. She motioned him to come on in, but keep quiet. "Computer," said Zaphod, "tell us what our present trajectory is." "A real pleasure, feller," it blurbed. "We are currently in orbit at an altitude of 300 miles around the legendary planet of Magrathea." "Proving nothing," said Ford. "I wouldn't trust that computer to speak my weight." "I can do that for you, sure," enthused the computer, punching out more ticker tape. "I can even work out your personality problems to 10 decimal places if it would help." Trillian interrupted. "Zaphod," she said, "any minute now we will be swinging round to the daylight side of the planet," adding, "whatever it turns out to be." "Hey, what do you mean by that? The planet's where I predicted it would be, isn't it?" "Yes, I know there's a planet there. I'm not arguing with anyone. It's just that I wouldn't know Magrathea from any other lump of cold rock. Dawn's coming up if you want it." Okay, muttered Zaphod. "Let's at least give our eyes a good time. Computer." "Hi there. What can I—" "Just shut up and give us a view of the planet again." A dark, featureless mass once more filled the screens, the planet rolling away beneath them. They watched for a moment in silence, but Zaphod was fidgety with excitement. "We are now traversing the night side," he said in a hushed voice. The planet rolled on. "The surface of the planet is now 300 miles beneath us," he continued. He was trying to restore a sense of occasion to what he felt should have been a great moment. Magrathea. He was piqued by Ford's skeptical reaction. Magrathea. In a few seconds, he continued, "we should see. There!" The moment carried itself. Even the most seasoned star tramp can't help but shiver at the spectacular drama of a sunrise seen from space. But a binary sunrise is one of the marvels of the galaxy. Out of the utter blackness stabbed a sudden point of blinding light. It crept up by slight degrees and spread sideways in a thin crescent blade, and within seconds 2 suns were visible, furnaces of light, searing the black edge of the horizon with white fire. Fierce shafts of color streaked through the thin atmosphere beneath them. "The fires of dawn," breathed Zaphod. "The twin sons of Solianus and Ram." "Oh, whatever," said Ford quietly. "Solianus and Ram," insisted Zaphod. The suns blazed into the pitch of space, and a low ghostly music floated through the bridge. Marvin was humming, ironically, because he hated humans so much. As Ford gazed at the spectacle of light before them, excitement burned inside him, but only the excitement of seeing a strange new planet. It was enough for him to see it as it was. It faintly irritated him that Zaphod had to impose some ludicrous fantasy onto the scene to make it work for him. All the Magrathean nonsense seemed juvenile. Isn't it enough to see that a garden is beautiful without having to believe that there are fairies at the bottom of it too? All this Magrathea business seemed totally incomprehensible to Arthur. He edged up to Trillian and asked her what was going on. I only know what Zaphod's told me, she whispered. Apparently, Magrathea is some kind of legend from way back which no one seriously believes in, bit like Atlantis on Earth. Except that the legends say the Magratheans used to manufacture planets. Arthur blinked at the screens and felt he was missing something important. Suddenly he realized what it was. Is there any tea on this spaceship? He asked. More of the planet was unfolding beneath them as the Heart of Gold streaked along its orbital path. The suns now stood high in the black sky. The pyrotechnics of dawn were over, and the surface of the planet appeared bleak and forbidding in the common light of day. Gray, dusty, and only dimly contoured, it looked dead and cold as a crypt. From time to time, promising features would appear on the distant horizon. Ravines, maybe mountains, maybe even cities. But as they approached, the lines would soften and blur into anonymity, and nothing would transpire. The planet's surface was blurred by time, by the slow movement of the thin, stagnant air that had crept across it for century upon century. Clearly, it was very, very old. A moment of doubt came to Ford as he watched the gray landscape move beneath them. The immensity of time worried him. He could feel it as a presence. He cleared his throat. Well, even supposing it is, said Zaphod. Which it isn't, continued Ford. What do you want with it anyway? There's nothing there. Not on the surface, said Zaphod. All right, just supposing there's something. I take it you're not here for the sheer industrial archaeology of it all. What are you after? One of Zaphod's heads looked away. The other one looked round to see what the first thing was looking at, but it wasn't looking at anything very much. Well, said Zaphod airily, it's partly the curiosity, partly a sense of adventure, and mostly I think it's the fame and the money. Ford glanced at him sharply. He got a very strong impression that Zaphod hadn't the faintest idea why he was there at all. You know, I don't like the look of that planet at all, said Trillian, shivering. Take no notice, said Zaphod. With half the wealth of the former Galactic Empire stored on it somewhere, it can afford to look frumpy. Bullshit, thought Ford. Even supposing this was the home of some ancient civilization now gone to dust, even supposing a number of exceedingly unlikely things, there was no way that vast treasures of wealth were going to be stored there in any form that would still have meaning now. He shrugged. I think it's just a dead planet, he said. The suspense is killing me, said Arthur testily. Stress and nervous tension are now serious social problems in all parts of the galaxy, and it is in order that this situation should not be in any way exacerbated that the following facts will now be revealed in advance. The planet in question is, in fact, the legendary Magrathea. The deadly missile attack shortly to be launched by an ancient automatic defense system will result merely in the breakage of 3 coffee cups and a mouse cage, the bruising of somebody's upper arm, and the untimely creation and sudden demise of a bowl of petunias and an innocent sperm whale. In order that some sense of mystery should still be preserved, no revelation will yet be made concerning whose upper arm sustains the bruise. This fact may safely be made the subject of suspense, since it is of no significance whatsoever. And that'll be the end of this episode. Next episode should be releasing same day. So next episode will be chapters 1, chapter 17 through 19. So I'll see you shortly in the next episode of today with chapter 17 through 19.